All right. So our topic for tonight is kind of the nurturing responsibility in our children, and kind of what does that look like. Several years ago, the school that my kids went to at the time, Perimeter Christian School, was a great school. It was actually very, very similar to what Bloomfield is, and just style and philosophy and parental involvement and all that. But one of the things that they always did was they always had these parent meetings. And once a month or so, we'd have to go to a parent meeting. So we'd go to the parent meeting and we'd be sitting there. And actually, I was the junior high pastor at the time. And one of the other guys who was another parent in the class was the senior high pastor. And all of a sudden, these parents would start asking questions about different projects and tasks and things that were going on in the class. And, well, how are they supposed to do this? And what's the right way to do this? And they're asking these like crazy details. And Jeff and I would look at each other and be like, do you know what they're talking about? And he'd be like, no, I have no idea what they're talking about. And so I'd get out and I'm like, Michelle, what are they talking about? She's like, yeah, some project that's coming up in like 2 months. And it's like, we'll get to it eventually. And so there's this kind of and what we really realized over time was that there was a little bit of a parenting philosophy difference that we began to have. And what was kind of our posture? What was our perspective? How did we really stand and involve and engage our kids? And so I was kind of having a little fun today, coming up with some different things and different ways that people in our society might have a posture towards our kids. And one of them I came up with was a copperhead snake. Very, very hands-off copperheads, if you don't know this, will actually run from you. They don't want to actually have anything to do with you. They'll go the opposite direction. They'll hide until they get cornered. And then once it gets cornered, then it will actually strike and it'll come out and bite you. And it's like there's a parenting philosophy in there where parents just kind of avoid. They're very hands-off. They don't pay attention to anything until something really, really bad happens. And then they pounce and they go after their kids. And it can be very messy. Or another one that I read about today was a stealth fighter parents. The article actually accused Gen Xers of being the stealth fighter parents. And what that kind of the idea behind that is they'll hold back, and then all of a sudden when something goes really wrong, they will just like attack whatever teacher or whatever coach or whoever it is that they're mad at, that they have perceived has wronged their child in some way, shape, or form, and they will just go after them. Or the other one that's been around since the 90s is the helicopter parent. That one who hovers, that one who is involved in everyone. I've heard stories of parents literally calling their kids college professors about their kids' grades. And just this hovering, always involved in every little tiny bit and piece and corner of their lives. And then one that we have been talking about is just that shepherding perspective, where our goal is to be engaged and active. We're cheering them on, we're leading them on, we're giving them oversight, and really striving to get after their heart. But of those first three, there's probably a little bit of us in our sin nature that tends towards one of those over the others. And for me, I probably tend towards that first one where I can be really hands-off and not really pay a whole lot of attention. Then when something goes wrong, all of a sudden I'll engage and it becomes very bad because usually I've reached a point of being very angry at that point in time. And so, but there's probably a little bit of one of those first three, of whether it's being that copperhead where you withdraw and hands off until something really, really bad happens, or the helicopter, or that stealth fighter that you just go in and attack anyone who even thinks about accusing your child or saying that your child has anything wrong or needs to be fixed or worked on. It's actually really, And to show how prevalent some of those are in our culture, I actually had a conversation with one of Emily's teachers a couple of weeks ago. And I just asked him a couple of questions because she was confused about what had happened in class. And he was like, and at first I could tell by his response, he was expecting me to attack him. And I was like, no, I'm not coming after you. I'm trying to, from what you're telling me, she misunderstood what was happening in class. So I need to go talk to her. And he was just very surprised that was my response, because that's not a normal response in our culture. It's usually one of these other ones, and the teacher, somehow things have shifted where in the education world, which Summer could probably very much talk about, is the teacher is the one who is wrong, not the student. When I was a kid, I was the one who was always wrong, and the teachers were always correct. And so as we look at this, one of the most common questions that I start to get into with parents over the years, parents of all ages, is, well, what kind of responsibility can my kid have at what time, and how old, and what do they have the ability to do, and when should they start doing chores, and when should finances come in, and how old are they when we still cause them to do certain spiritual things or engage in certain spiritual ways? And so the question I kind of am approaching this with is, how is it that we begin to help nurture responsibility into our children? Pragmatically, I don't want a 30-year-old man-child living in my basement. From a biblical perspective, let's take a look at this passage, 2 Thessalonians 3, verses 6 through 13. And he starts off, and he says, and you know what is... Am I in the right spot? No, I'm in chapter 2. 3 helps. Now we commend you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you keep away from any brother who is walking in idleness and not in accord with the tradition that you received from us. For you yourselves know how you ought to imitate us, because we were not idle when we were with you, nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But with toil and labor we worked night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. It was not because we do not have that right, but to give you in ourselves an example to imitate. For even when we were with you, we would give you this command: if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busy bodies. Now, such persons we commend and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. As for you, brothers, do not grow weary in doing good. And so when you take this idea of what has taken place in 2 Thessalonians, later on you can go back and take a look at that Proverbs 6 through 10, and I love that passage. It's actually a great passage to use with your kids, because it's, consider the ant, you sluggard, and how an ant toils and works, and then it ends with that passage of a little toil, a little rest, a little laying of the hands. Whoops, and we're going to enter into Matt's paraphrased version, but where evil begins to come in and take over. And so this idea being that God has made us to be people who are nurturing, people who are caring, people who are providing, people who are investing in developing in the world around us. You think about so many of your positions, whether it's engineering new technology, or it's working in medical field and helping people be healthy, or even safety and security, and just all these different things that begin to take place. It's this nurturing, and these are these God-given wonderful callings that he's given to us to care for and develop his world. And so one of those things for us as parents is we want to nurture this responsibility into our kids through the nurture and admonition of the Lord, to point them towards Jesus and what Jesus has called us to do. There's also 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you do in word or in deed, do it all for the glory of God. That we are called to be people who are providing and caring and giving and developing and creating. And so what does it look like? And so I came up with a few different principles to help nurture responsibility in our children. And so the first one is to give them age-appropriate responsibility. And when I say give them age-appropriate responsibility, I am talking about giving them responsibility and things that they can be involved with at as young of an age as you possibly can. And I have found that even children, once they start walking, they've started to develop to this point where you can actually help begin to teach them how to be responsible for different things. Something as simple as their toys, and beginning to teach them to learn how to take this toy and walk it over and put it in a basket. And you're starting to teach these ideas of them taking responsibility for their space and what is around them. One of the other things related to this, giving them age-appropriate responsibility, is our kids at any age can do far more than we ever give them credit for. It's actually amazing to watch what they can actually do, but they can do so much more than I've ever given them credit for being able to do. And now with my kids even being in their 20s, I still have that, I still get this 16-year-old kid in my head, and that's not who they are anymore. And they start to do things like, this coming week, I get to go to a youth pastor conference, and my son Andrew will be there as a youth pastor who's taking real responsibility in student ministry at another church. And it's this, he's actually becoming a functioning adult. He's got his own apartment, and he's living on his own, and he's taking care of things, and he did his own taxes this year. And so as a dad, sometimes it's easy for me to lock them into a certain age, but they're not. He can actually do things, and that doesn't just apply to a 23-year-old, that applies to our 16-year-olds and our 10-year-olds and our 8-year-olds and our 5-year-olds. This falls in line with too. So they can do way more than we give them credit for, so don't fall for their dumb acts, or don't let their dumb acts fool you. In other words, don't let, they act really dumb, they act like they can't do something, but don't fall for it, because they can do so much more than they know, and they can do so much more than we do, or than we know that they can do. The second bullet point there is let them fail and take responsibility. Let them fail and take responsibility. If we look back at our own lives, we have learned so much more in our failures than we have in our successes. When they fail, ask questions. Get them to think. Get them to process what's really going on and what happened and what went wrong and why are you not getting along with this teacher, or why did you get in a fight with that other kid, or why are you upset right now, and start to get into some of those questions to get them to think. And when they fail, help them, talk it through with them, strategize with them, work through it with them. But when they fail, let them begin then to take responsibility for that as well. And when they begin to own that and own those mistakes, it's amazing what they begin to learn. The next one is teach them to advocate for themselves. This is something that most of us do automatically and naturally, but sometimes I have to remind myself of this with my kids, is teach them to advocate for themselves, whether it's with a teacher, a coach, a friend. Teach them how to have hard conversations. Make them have hard conversations. Make them walk up to their teacher and have a conversation with them. The teacher that I talked to a couple of weeks ago, Emily had already followed up with that teacher, and she still didn't fully understand what was going on. And so that was when I asked him from the backside of it, going, okay, help me understand what's happening, because she's still not fully getting it. She's still not fully understanding. But at first, I wanted her to go in, and she did it. She went in and she had that conversation, and she began to do that. And one of the keys there is advocating for themselves. Is it's so tempting to bail them out. It can be anything from that mama bear instinct, or this protective instinct, or that wallet that is absolutely burning a hole in your pocket because you know that you have the resources to help them right here, right now. But no, they actually need to take the ownership, and they need to take the responsibility for it, and they need to pay for whatever that mistake is or was. The next bullet point down is teach them to advocate. Whoops, I already did that one. The next one, make them do things that make them uncomfortable. Make them do things that make them feel uncomfortable. I can still remember the day Sarah would have been either a freshman or sophomore in high school, and I handed her 10 or 20 bucks and said, hey, I need you to run into the grocery store real quick, and I need you to buy whatever it was, a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread, or probably, knowing us, it was probably frozen pizza or something. And so I handed her the money. I say, or no, it wasn't even money. It was a debit card. I handed her my debit card and said, hey, will you go in and buy this, this, and this? And I'm going to wait here for you. You would have thought, the look she gave me, you would have thought I just told her, would you go inside and kill the clerk? Like, she looked absolutely mortified and terrified in that moment that I dare ask her to go in the store all by herself, walk through this whole process. Because what had happened up before that point is I'd gone through it and she'd watch me do it and I'd show her how to do it and I'd show her how to swipe the cards and pay and enter PIN numbers and all that. And so she knew how to do it, but I went and made her do it by herself. But then when she came back out, her reaction was hilarious because she had like this huge smile on her face because she had accomplished it. But she looks at me and goes, "Thanks, Dad, for making me do that." But yet she was so proud of herself because she actually did it and she showed herself that she could actually do that. And so make them do make them do things that make them feel uncomfortable. Having hard conversations, as I already said, with teachers, with friends, with coaches. There's another story recently where there was one student had done something that was not appropriate and then pulled in another student had caught it. And so as this student talks with their parents, they realized that this student really needed to confront this other person on their sin. And man, that's hard when you're both middle schoolers. But the parents coached them through it, helped them do it, had a good conversation. And the two students actually had a conversation about it. And the student who was approached actually looked back at the other one and said, "You're right. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have approached it that way." But the power that both of them learned in that moment of a peer-to-peer interaction, of a peer-to-peer hard conversation, and loving somebody enough to approach them on their sin, it really was kind of an amazing thing that made them feel uncomfortable, but was one of those things that helped them to grow. And then the next one is shepherd them along the way. And so there's this actually comes out of a business book. Maybe some of y'all are familiar with it or have seen it. It's been around for a long, long time. But if we think our parenting through this same model, where what we start off with when they're very young is we start off with this idea of we're giving them directives. We're telling them exactly what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. But then as time goes on, and this goes back to an earlier point of we want to do it earlier and younger, where we get them and we start to coach them. Or so maybe the first one, direct them, you could say, tell them what to do. And then the coaching one, you could say, show them how to do it, even with them watching you. And then that one even starts to become a blend of you're showing them how to do it, you're explaining them how to do it, they're starting to do it, but you're doing it, this idea of you're doing it side by side. And then you move into this level of support where I'm now watching you and supporting you, but you're over there taking care of the task, taking care of the thing, taking care of whatever it is that needs to be done. And then finally you move to this idea of delegating. And so I was even, you could think about this through the lens of loading a dishwasher. My wife has a very, very particular way in which you load the dishwasher so that you can get the most amount of stuff in and so that you don't damage any of the dishes that are in the dishwasher. So she's very specific about that. And so with all of our kids, and perhaps me as well, I'm still being trained in this, but there's this process where she would tell them how to do it, and then she would load the dishwasher with them, and then she would stand back and watch them load the dishwasher and say, no, kind of flip that there, and what if you did this, and what if you moved this over here? And then it became a point where she would just delegate and just like, go, load the dishwasher. She's in a different room taking care of something else. But there's this training coming alongside process that begins to happen with them. And so the backside here is what does this actually begin to look like?
Matt, I think you missed the one before shepherd them along the way.
Oh yeah, I did.
Missed it.
No, you're good. Yep, okay. Give them a choice among good choices. Give them a choice among good choices. So what the idea of that is give them a choice. So you want them to have you want them to have a choice. You want them to be able to choose things. And this isn't necessarily as true when they're super young, but this is something that really starts to begin to develop over time. And eventually, for example, I've had a couple of conversations recently about, hey, I'm starting to get a little bit of pushback from my my kid about being involved in youth group or being involved in different things. This one was specifically about youth group. And, how much do I push and how much do I tell my kid that they have to go to youth group? I don't want to force them to, but at the same time, they really need that. And I said, what if? So one of my things I've always encouraged parents to do with that one is, like, as a family, we're going to go to worship. There's just no questions asked. We're there week in, week out. This actually starts to bleed into my next point a little bit. But we're there week in, week out. But in my mind, what I always encourage everybody is do worship, you do discipleship, and then you have opportunities to serve. And so for a student, you're going to go, you have to do worship +1. You have to do something that's helping you develop and grow and be challenged spiritually. We're doing it as parents here at home, but you need other people speaking into your life. So for example, with this one, I said, hey, you could give them a choice. You can say, we're all going to go to worship every week. They're not getting pushback on that one. It's more the other things. And he said, so what you're going to do is you're going to go to something else that's going to help you grow and develop spiritually. So you can have a choice. You can go to Impact on Sunday nights. You can go to the Wednesday night Bible study, or you can do the research, and if there's another church, another youth group, or another BSF, or something else that you want to be involved in, go ahead, do the research, figure out what you want to be involved in, and we'll talk about it. And so what you're doing is, I'm giving you a choice, and honestly, there's the one obviously I want you to choose, but at the same time, I'm giving you a choice, I'm giving you some options, so that you can really think that through, and that can apply to, that can apply from anything from spiritual things to cleaning your room, and just like, hey, look, you want to go out tonight? Sweet. You can clean your room and go out, or you can not clean your room and don't go out. It's your choice. Or you can come up with a third option, whatever that might be, but really putting the onus of the decision as they get older and older, putting that onus of that decision on them. So thank you for pointing that out. Sorry, I skipped over that one. So what does this look like? Well, I just talked about a little bit about the spiritually one with worship, discipleship, serving. I really firmly and strongly believe from Acts 2:42, those are kind of the three bedrocks for all of us, is that we need to be in worship every single week. We need to be corporately gathered together as the people of God. God does something amazing and special to that. But in Acts, they not only worshiped, but they gathered together and gave themselves over to the disciples' teaching. And so there's opportunities where they are learning and growing, where they're being trained, where they're being taught, where they're getting with other Christians in that training and teaching. And this is something that's coming alongside what we're already doing as families. We want to take advantage of the fact that the community and the people of God are speaking into our children's lives. And then serving. We want them to be serving individually and as a family. And so if we're going to really help them to begin to take over that, help them to learn and grow in their own spiritual development, we start with things like family devotions and praying with them. And when they're young, maybe we're reading the Bible to them and we're praying with them every night. And as they learn to read, we start to have them read on their own. We begin to pray with them, and then maybe even we begin to pray with them. And then when we walk out of the room, say, hey, maybe you pray for 2 or 3 other things on your own. And so we begin to walk out. And so what begins to happen is they begin to gradually take ownership of their own spiritual development, of their own reading, of their own prayer. And then as they get older and as they become teenagers, encouraging them as they become middle schoolers, encouraging them to do their devotions on their own and really begin to take that ownership of them. But like at a very young age, maybe we do it all for them or with them. Not for them, we do it with them. And then as they get older and older, we begin to have them take more and more, ownership of that. And then that goes back to that story I just had said of if we're really going to help nurture that responsibility of their own spiritual lives into them by creating these 3 habits in them on a regular basis, it's just something that begins to develop inside of them. And that one we've spent a lot of time talking about, so I don't want to belabor that point anymore. So if we're going to nurture responsibility within them, what do we do? What about mentally? And so kind of the 3 things I had thought of that we help our children develop and take responsibility for mentally is, first and foremost, learning how to think. asking them questions. Not always giving them the answers, but challenging them, making them think, helping them to get excited about learning. Doing stuff where they start to learn and come alongside you and hang out with you and do the things that you like to learn about, the things that you like to do. One of the thoughts I had about that is just, I love, and as so many of us do, I love being out in nature. I love hiking and biking and being out there. And just as you look at nature and teaching them about who God is and teaching them about what he has done. And maybe it's that learning of the way things work, but really pulling them alongside of us and then helping them to learn how to learn. And then helping them begin in their own education, letting them take ownership, letting them take responsibility for that. And so one of my favorite phrases that I know my kids have looked at me and said, I will never ever say this to my children, and someday they will. One of them is, what is that between your ears? And they're like, a brain. I'm like, then use it. Like, think for a second, slow down, and getting them to actually think. And then the other one is, they'll ask for homework, and I'm like, well, what have you done? Or they'll hand me, one of my rules is, when you walk up with a paper that you've just written, I don't edit papers that you haven't already edited yourself. Because I'm not going to read through your terrible writing. You have to learn how to edit it yourself before I'm going to edit this thing. And one of the phrases I like to tell my children is, I already did 7th grade and I passed. It's your turn. And so let them take the ownership. Let them take the responsibility for it. And along with this is letting them fail. And you rescuing them, or us as parents rescuing them from an F in 4th grade is far more damaging than them actually getting that F in 4th grade or 5th grade or even 6th or 7th or 8th or 9th grade. The F and them having to learn the experience of getting that F is way more valuable than if we go in and we talk to a teacher and we try to rescue them and we try to bail them out. Because when they fail, they learn from it. They learn what they did wrong. They learn their mistakes. They learn how to work hard, to work back out of it again. And finally, when they fail, we have this beautiful opportunity to apply the gospel to their lives. And just to look at them and be like, look, you failed. Your identity is not in this success or in this failure. Your identity is in Jesus. And Jesus loves you and cares for you and forgives you. So you know what? This fail at this point is an opportunity for you to begin to learn and for you to begin to grow. It's not something that's going to crush you or destroy you. It's going to help you to learn and grow. And Jesus loves you no matter what. And you know what? Maybe science isn't your strongest subject. And that's okay. We're going to learn how to work hard, and let's help us. Let's come alongside one another and help one another do that. So one of the other pieces and the ways that we nurture responsibility into our kids is through physical, through learning how to take care of their themselves at a young age, taking care of their body, taking care of their basic needs, taking care of the environment around them. I am a firm believer, if they have the ability to walk and talk, then they have the ability to begin to take care of themselves and the world around them. And so at every age, I came up with a few different categories, and many of you already have great systems in all of these, but I'm just going to throw out some things and some ideas to think about. But a kid at every age, what can they do in the following arenas around your house? How can they be responsible for cleaning up after themselves, cleaning up after their room, or picking up their room? And at what point do they start getting themselves out of bed themselves? If your sophomore in high school cannot set their own alarm and get out of bed by themselves, we've got something to work on, in my opinion. That might be overly strong, but in my opinion, we got something to work on. I think my kids, late elementary, early middle school, they started to be responsible for getting themselves out of bed, for taking care of themselves, for getting themselves dressed. We, in middle school, my kids were all responsible for getting up and making their own lunches and taking care and making sure that they were going to get fed at lunchtime. And if they didn't get up and make their own lunch, they remembered the next day because they were really hungry. So cleaning up after themselves, taking care of their room, being responsible. The second one is cleaning up on the inside of our houses. So having from anything from rotating chore charts that were age appropriate, that for us, I had to learn very quickly. I cannot factor in the chore chart based on how long it takes the child to complete the chore. I have to factor the chore chart in how long that task should take. Because some of mine would race through and do it really, really fast. And others could take like 4 hours to clean a toilet. And so you just had to learn and go, no, yes, it took you 2 hours to clean that toilet, but that's not because it takes 2 hours to clean a toilet. That's because it took you 2 hours to clean a toilet. And so learning some of those, helping them learn some of those things, but having chore charts and how long a task should take, not how long it actually takes that kid to do it. And those, chore charts around the house. And one of the other, so then thinking about kitchen duties, and coming up with cooking and cleaning. We actually, so during quarantine last year, everybody was home. We had a middle schooler, a high schooler, and 2 college kids all at home. And all of a sudden, after like 2 weeks of quarantine, Michelle's about ready to die. And we're like, what is going on here? Because she's trying to work and help everybody, and everybody's all around the house all day, and everybody's working and everybody's doing, and then Michelle's making dinner, and we're kind of half-heartedly helping her clean up. And finally we just said, all right, stop. This has got to stop. And so we actually created a rotating meal prep schedule that everybody had certain days that they were responsible for prepping a meal, certain days they were responsible for cleaning up after a meal. And we just kind of created these rotations. But these are the types of things that can start at very young ages. So if you think about on the kitchen duty side of things, I talked about dishes earlier of, even as something for a young child that now has the ability to walk and talk a little bit, like even learning how to take their cup from their seat to the kitchen and making them responsible for just that little step, like so many of us already do, or feeding the dog. I remember my little 2-year-olds, feeding the dog, obviously with us standing there right next to it, so make sure the dog didn't get like the entire bag of food. But they got excited about it. They had the opportunity, they could participate in something, they could own something. And then as they get older and older, giving them more and more inside house cleaning duties, kitchen duties, and everybody helps in our house as well with outdoor chores, from lawn to weeding to bushes to leaf cleanup and so on and so on. And then there's always the good old special project side. I had a friend of mine who his wife asked him one day, she was like, Larry, how in the world did you learn how to do all of these home repairs? And he looks back at his wife and he goes, holding the flashlight. He's like, I sat there my entire life holding a flashlight, watching my dad under the sink or fixing the furnace or fixing the plumbing or fixing the electricity. And I just watched and I observed. And so when we're doing those special projects, having our kids come alongside of us, when they're younger, they're a hindrance because they slow us down, but the value in that and the relationship and the process that happens is so rich. When they're older, they're a hindrance because they like to gripe and complain and grumble. But once you get them started, it's awesome to watch how they begin to engage. And then there's a sweet spot in the middle where they don't do either one of those. They're actually genuinely helpful. Never felt like that lasted really long. But this idea of just helping them and having them lead alongside of us. And when we're doing these things, the most important part, and this was something I learned so much from my parents, was doing it with them, not assigning them to a task and then making them go do it. Like when it comes to leaf cleanup, we've got massive trees in our front yard. And I lost track of how many, I think one year, the first year we were here, it was like 50 or 60 bags of leaves the first round of having to clean up leaves, which I'm sure some of y'all can bury that with the volume of leaf bags that you have. But what we did is we just were like, all right, everybody's in the front yard, everybody's cleaning up leaves, and everybody who was home went out and started picking up leaves, and we all did it together. And by doing it all together, it went faster, everybody was in better moods, we laughed, we sang, and we probably put on a show for the neighbors. But just by the act of doing it all together is much better than when I remember a time I made the mistake of assigning all 4 kids to go clean up leaves in the yard, and they were all younger. And it just turned into like World War III in my front yard. It was absolute backyard. It was absolutely terrible. And then later on, we move here and we're going to clean up leaves. And I look at Sarah and Emily, I'm like, what? Like, you are doing it the most inefficient way possible. And they look at me and they're like, this is the way Andrew and Ashley always made us do this. I'm like, well, there's a good parent fail. And so having learned like, no, one of you hold the bag, one of you dump the leaves in the bag. It goes way fast, and they're like, oh yeah, this is way better. So us coming alongside them and doing it with them makes all of those kind of tasks a lot more fun. And here's the interesting thing, that as a youth pastor, there's a piece of me, as a youth pastor, I can tell you what families make their kids work and do chores and be responsible for things around their house, and what families don't as soon as we go on a retreat. I can tell you who has to and who doesn't. It was impressive. There was one retreat, this is pre-New City, that Michelle's had a kitchen crew, and she's like, hey, this is a 15 or 16-year-old. Hey, can you boil some water? And the kid looks at her and goes, how do you boil water? And she's like, you are 16 years old. How do you not know how to boil water? So it begins to show up in other arenas, but those life skills and those values and doing it along with them and the relationship value that happens through that, and then the life conversations and the gospel conversations and the Jesus conversations and the relationship conversations that begin to form as we're doing those things together is so huge. So not only do we want to help teach them responsibility in the physical realm, we also want to do it in the financial realm. I had several years ago, so these are all, by the way, don't give me credit for anything I've said. I have literally stolen everything I've said from other people and mentors and people ahead of me and people I've asked questions about and grabbed it all from others. And financially, there was the one I looked at, so several years ago, Andrew was just starting his freshman year of high school. And there was this guy who his youngest was graduating from college. And I was like, hey, Elf, tell me as Andrew's starting into high school, Ashley's just a year behind him, tell me what is something I really need to be concentrating on at this point in time. And he looks at me and he didn't even hesitate, skip a beat, or think about it. He just immediately said, make them financially responsible for as much as you possibly can, as soon as you possibly can. And I just went, okay, you didn't even hesitate, you didn't think, you didn't squirm on that, you didn't even contemplate. It was just boom. It was right there on the tip of his tongue to make them financially responsible for as much as possible, as early and as young as possible. Because as they learn, what they begin to learn is how to take care of their finances. And that can start as early as they start asking for stuff. Hey, mommy and daddy, can I have? You're standing in the grocery store aisle and they're looking at something on the shelf and goes, I want that. Or actually, they usually skip right to I need. And they go, I need that. And you're like, no, you don't. You do not need that little piece of junk toy that's going to break before we ever get to the car. But what we began to do and what we learned from other people is we started giving them an allowance at a very young age. And for us, philosophically, for the Lucanvilles, our allowances were never, ever tied to chores. You did chores because you lived in my house, because you had a bed and you had clothes and you had food and you get educated. That's why you do chores, because you exist. The allowance purpose of that was to teach them how to become financially responsible. And so from a very early age, we always taught them three different things. You've got, you need to, when you get your allowance, you have tithe, and then you need to save. Ours always ended up as you need to save to buy gifts for those around you and your siblings when it comes to Christmas and birthdays. And then you can have some spending money and what you do with that. And it was always kind of age-based as to how much they got. And so they, at a very young 5-6 years old, they were starting to get that little bit of money so they could decide whether they wanted to buy that. And so they'd save up their money and they'd buy that junk toy, and then that junk toy would break. And all of a sudden they're starting to learn some of those valuable responsibilities in that. And then as time goes on, they began to make and earn more. They began to earn more money, and they begin to do other and different things. And so as they get older, they can do extra projects if they want to make more money. They could do extra things, extra tasks. They could begin to work for neighbors as they get older, and as they get old enough, they can, all of my kids around age 16 began to get jobs and be able to provide for themselves and be able to save. And over time, what we did is we gradually provided less and less. And so I can share with you all kind of the way we have walked through it. Some of it's worked, some of it hasn't worked. All of it is ideas I've stolen from other people. But what we did is we walked through with it. We started with an allowance. And then I had a friend of mine, he had a daughter right at the same age we were, and he was like, yeah, I was giving her a little measly, piddly allowance, and she's in middle school, and she's asking for a phone. And so the idea we had is, okay, fine. We will get you a phone, but your allowance goes away. And so you now have to start working for other things. And we're like, that's brilliant. We give a piddly little allowance. They can't really do much with it. So we gave our kids a choice. You want to keep getting an allowance or you want to keep getting a phone? As a middle schooler, I promise you they choose phone 100% of the time. And for us, the magic age developed as 14. And so that was when all of our kids were in 8th grade. And so that was just that for us. That was when they did it. At 5th grade, they're like, all my friends have phones. I want a phone. Or can I have a phone? And I'm like, no, as a 5th grader, you don't need a phone. And so that was so for us, it became at 14. The other thing that started happening in middle school, and the other thing that starts happening in middle school, is they start getting really, really conscientious about clothes. And what is it? What am I wearing? What do I want to wear? What do I want to buy? And so I stole this idea from one of my pastors because he's like, it was really funny. When my kids started to have to buy their own clothes, all of a sudden, Old Navy looked a lot better than Gap. And so so to get out of that battle of what clothes are we going to buy, what shoes are we going to buy, what aren't we going to buy, we had a little, $40 a month stipend that we set aside to buy clothes. And so I just started transferring that to their account. And so now, anytime you want to buy clothes, you have to buy clothes out of that money, and you've got to save up. And all of a sudden, they're like, the biggest one, every one of my kids got so frustrated with. They're like, I have to pay $100 for a pair of tennis shoes? And we're like, yes, you do, because you all run track. And you can't buy a cheap $30 pair of tennis shoes to run track, and you're going to hurt yourself. And so they would get so frustrated with that. And it began to give them this reality of what life really costs. Because as you and I all know, $40 a month is not enough to buy them clothes for a year. So that also means that they had to start working. Because remember, their allowance is gone. And so they don't have any ability to actually make, they have to go out and figure out a way to make money so they have an ability to pay for things. Because the other thing that started happening in middle school is they started to do youth ministry retreats. Well, we always wanted them to be able to go on retreats. So we chose, the way we did it was we said, we're going to pay for the cost of the registration fee for the retreat or for the sport that you want to pay in, but any incidentals are on you. So this last retreat that we were just on, I'm standing at the counter at Culver's, and I was like, I looked at our speaker, I'm like, hey, Mikey, come over here, I need to pay for yours. And James looks at me and goes, you're forgetting one. And I was like, no, I'm not. She's on her own. And he's like, what? I was like, yeah, it's a retreat. I pay for the registration fee. She pays for the incidentals, and she pays for like her meal on the way up. And he goes, Luke, Ben, Matt, did you hear that? And so, but that was just kind of the way that we did it. Like, that's just kind of the way that we started to work on balancing that out. And so they know if they're going on a trip, they've got a little bit extras and incidentals that they have to pay for. Well, then the day comes that they start to get a driver's license. And Scott Cairo is very aware of this. The insurance cost when they get a driver's license is absolutely ridiculous. Like unbelievably ridiculous. And so what we did, we started out with a couple of different models, but what we ended up settling on is, okay, just for ease and so that it's not all that super complicated, we are no longer going to give you any money to close for your close budget. We're going to cover your car insurance. But the car that you drive, you have to put gas in, and notice their clothing account just went away. So now they have to, but they're still responsible for paying for all of their own clothes in that. And so I like as I go through this whole process, what my whole idea and my main point through this long process is this idea of just gradually taking things over time and shifting it from me to them and from me to them, so that when they got to college, the way that we did it was we said, we have X number of dollars a year to help you with college. And so that's how much we're going to be able to give you this year. And we do it a year by year basis. And then so the colleges you're at, the scholarships, and going and finding more scholarships or finding a job to fill in the gaps, that becomes their responsibility. And it's been amazing, going all the way back to the very beginning, it's been amazing to see how they have stepped up and they have taken ownership and they have sat down and figured it out. Every year about this time, all of a sudden the financial spreadsheets start coming out with my kids, because that was the pattern I started with my older two. Is in April, the school year is winding down. A college kid in April is absolutely flat broke. They got nothing, if you all remember back to those days, because it's all been expended. And so now they're starting to calculate, how much do I need for tuition? How much do I need for room and board? Where's all this money going to come from? Where am I going to work this summer? Where can I find some more scholarship money? And they're starting to figure it out. And so, and sometimes along the ways, we've had to help them out. But I have very strongly always resisted just handing them the money. There's been a couple of times where we've had to do something where we're like, hey, this is going to be a dad loan. You have to pay it back. You're going to make monthly payments until it's paid off. I'm going to give you, because of the situation you're in, I'm not going to charge you interest on it. I'm just going to give you a dad loan that's an interest-free loan. And then just kind of help them over the course. And it's amazing to watch how anxious they get about getting that paid off as fast as they possibly can, because they don't want to owe us money. They want to be independent. They want to be on their own. They want to be able to be rolling themselves. And so that was a really big, long explanation, but just that's the way we have worked on nurturing that level of responsibility in that arena in them. And then finally, we want to nurture that arena of responsibility in them emotionally, helping them learn to celebrate when things are good and to find joy, helping them to learn how to suffer when things are when things are bad and hard and difficult, and then helping them to learn how to endure, helping them to work through hard times and hard things, learning how to press on or move on in the midst of failure, and helping them that when they're hurting and suffering and in difficult spots, to be looking to the cross. When they're in hard relationships, coaching them, helping them, coming alongside them, but making them work through it and deal with it. And that can start at like a 5 or a 6-year-old types of conversations, or 3-year-olds sometimes. I've listened to Greta Park have those kind of conversations with Benji, who's 3, and just kind of how are you responding to the way that other people are treating you, and you feel wronged in this, but, and just kind of working through at that age level, helping them to face and look at life's harsh realities, having to deal with other people's sin when they hurt you and they come after you, and pointing them to the cross and helping them to learn and to grow through that. It's very important that we help them to face hard truths, that we don't avoid hard truths with them or hard situations. When it comes to death and disease and the reality of sin and the disappointment that they are not at the center of the universe. I need to be reminded of that one as much as my kids do, or more. That we don't protect them from those hard truths, but we let them face and endure and learn how to work through those hard truths by the power of the gospel. And so one of the things, just being open and honest and transparent with them. So when I was at my last church, it did not end well, and things came crashing down very hard. And they basically, the end of the way that it came about is they had decided that they no longer liked the way I was leading. After 6.5 years, they decided that they no longer liked the way I was leading our junior high team. And they said, "You're done." And it happened in a matter of 5 days, and it was over. And all of a sudden, we were just set reeling of going, where are we going? What are we doing? And at that point with our kids, we had a couple of choices. We could have said, we're going to protect them from this as much as possible because we don't want them to know the harsh realities and what really took place and how bad it really was. Or we could share all of the dirt and the hard and the pain and the difficulty with them. With our situation, with Emily being halfway through 7th grade, Sarah was halfway through 11th grade, Andrew and Ashley were in, I guess Emily was at the beginning of 7th grade, Sarah was at the beginning of 11th grade, which would have put Andrew and Ashley at the beginning of sophomore and junior years of college. We chose to go the route of we're just going to be open and transparent, let them hear and see our difficulty, our pain, where we were, and then help them and talk through with them and identify with them and walk through what they were going through and point us all to the gospel and point us all to Jesus and let things fly. But then, okay, now, is that real or is that not real? And work through it. And how does the gospel apply? And what does the gospel look like? To this all kind of culminated in a conversation around a fire pit in October, where we're all sitting there and all 6 of us are on a fall break camping trip. And we just sat around the fire pit and talked for 3 hours about everything that had taken place over the last couple of months. Because by that point in time, we knew we were coming here. And we were starting to be able to look and heal from what had happened and look forward to what was coming. But we, in those moments, said we're not going to protect our kids from the harsh realities and difficulties and pain that exist in life. How do we love people who have hurt us and wounded us deeply? And some of those relationships still have not been restored. And I look forward to the day that those are restored. But those conversations helped us, helped them learn how to look at and begin to nurture them and what it looks like to walk through the emotions and the difficulties of life. So finally, in these last 2 points here, remember you're going to fail, but God doesn't. You're going to fail, you're going to fall short, you're not going to do these things well. You're going to look out the window and see all of your kids fighting over picking up the leaves in the front yard and go, there's probably a better way to do this. And that's okay, because God doesn't fail. And God does in them exactly what God needs to do. And as we come before Him in humble and repentance, knowing that our identity is in Him, and let's be honest, God loves our kids better than we do, more than we do. God not only loves our kids better and more than we do, God knows exactly what our kids need more than we do. And so we're going to fail. And then the second one is our goal is not to be perfect parents, but parents who raise their children, as Ephesians 6:4 says, in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, flowing into Hebrews 12, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. As we nurture our kids in taking responsibility and being responsible in all these different areas, we're going to fail, and that's okay. Jesus loves us anyways. Jesus is going to work anyways. Jesus is going to work and grow our kids and give them exactly what they need. Our goal is not to be perfect. We can't be perfect. We won't be perfect. Our goal is simply to go, let's all look at the cross together. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much for this time. Lord, we thank you for your grace and your mercy. Oh Lord, grow us in you. May your name be honored and praised. Amen.